So Justin Bangert is a licensed marriage and family counselor. Did I get the marriage and family therapist here in the Madison area? I've heard him speak a few times. We're really excited to have him. I'll let him tell you more about himself. But let's welcome Justin.
All right. So I'd like to start with the end goal in mind. Before you came in today, what were the things you thought about that brought this topic to your attention that you thought might be helpful if we were to leave here questions you have in your mind, situations you're concerned about, specific scenarios maybe you're afraid to or apprehensive to have to face? So I want you to take a moment to reflect on that first. My goal, and I try to think of the end in mind, I'll introduce myself in a minute here as far as parents, but I have 3 kids, 9 years, we're done with the almost stage, so they're actually 9, and they're actually daughter's 9, and then twin boys that are 7. So it was a couple years ago, 3s and 4s, where we get a new toy, and I always thought about what are the different ways they're going to fight over this thing. As I'm saying, thank you to the person who gave it to us. So I was trying to think of the end goal in mind. So, or how messy can this room get, and what's it going to look like at 8:30 at bedtime? What's that actually going to be? So when we walk out of today, my goal is for about an hour to do a presentation, then a half-hour conversation, discussions, and I'll give you a couple of prompters for that. But my main goal is to provide an opportunity for more awareness, just to be able to name and understand the topic, which you all understand. Somebody asked about our teens or children welcome. In many ways, they could teach us a lot more, unfortunately, in some of these areas. So just being able to be more eyes open, to be able to have a little more confidence or a little more preparation of what kind of tough discussions, tough assessments of yourself, perhaps, with your spouse, with your co-parent, with your children specifically, but also the opportunity to experience in your own church setting to be able to name this topic and talk about it directly. I've been a professional 12 years now, just past my almost, so 12 years, and it's been about 10 years that I've been specializing in this area, and this is the very first time that I've been asked specifically about purity, pornography, to talk about it to parents in a parish. So through leaders, I've talked to the leaders, I've talked to priest training, focus couples, different things, but not about the topic specifically for parents in the parish. So I want to appreciate the invitation, but also the diocese push to really be able to, we're a large, obviously, family, and the don't talk rule, I'm a middle child, so I naturally broke that rule a lot. I was willing to ask why. I love turning 5-minute timeouts into 30-day punishment, because I would always say why. Okay, Mom, Dad, I get it. I understand that you're the parent, I'm not, but just tell me why so I can decide if I like your rule or not. Okay, I understand. Just tell me why so I can know if it's worth getting in trouble the next time I decide that. So being able to talk directly and just name it, I think is such a great breaking of a healthy breaking of a rule here. Why am I here? So I'm married. I'm a married parent, a father, 3 children. I genuinely have concerns of how society is. I have, as you were mentioning, how the accessibility is just so different. It's such a different world. Yet the beautiful thing is I'm also, sorry guys, we're guys, so I like to keep it simple. By the way, our brains are about 7 times less wired than women to connect different dots. So it's a neurological fact, not an excuse. It does help sometimes. But being able to just keep it simple in the sense of when we get down to it, it's really about stewardship. And everything biblically that we know to be a healthy steward applies, whether we're talking about social media, video game, all the new technology, or obviously about purity. It also is simple as far as from Adam and Eve. So this is the beginning of the story as well as the end of the story. In a good way, you already know a lot of these things. It's just, as I said, a willingness to speak about it in an arena which can cause a lot of anxiety. So as a parent and as a father, I'm looking for resources myself which is partly why I love to investigate into these things and then communicate and teach about them. I'm a converted Catholic. I was always half Catholic or Diet Coke Catholic. Growing up, my parents separated, but my mother remarried, and my father would go to Catholic church about half the time. So I was always aware of and raised, but when my wife and I married, it was clear that we were going to be a Catholic family. She was very Catholic. In fact, I don't know if it's this parish or the sister parish, Cleo Huffman, my grandma-in-law, the one who I gave a resume to in order to date her granddaughter. She approved, and then 13, 14 years later, she came, we went to her birthday recently, and she goes, I saw you at my church. I said, I don't remember going to your church. She saw the flyer, and I was pretty impressed. So as a Catholic myself, I'm a Christian counseling professional, and I work at the Center for Christian Counseling. I'm also in Sauk City, which is a psychology clinic. It's a non-Christian, it's a secular, but I get to do behind the scenes Christian therapy. I just don't know it, but I'm really using scripture, just not saying it. And then at the center in Madison, we can do that overtly. Since 10 years 2 years into my career, for the last 10 years, I've been certified as a sexual addiction therapist. And then a video game social media specialist. So really aware of kind of the online digital technology influences. And as a result, obviously, a lot of my practice is working with teens, with adults on integrity issues, betrayal, trust, boundaries, and then parenting, and then how to create, like you said, safe haven, how to create a safe space in our heart, in our homes, and in our communities. So that's the reason why I'm here, and that's the intention of today, is everyone in the right presentation. I saw a couple other rooms maybe doing presenters. You can leave now. I can turn around if you want me to. So, raising purity, focused teens in a modern technology world. Which button do I'm actually not tech savvy, that's the secret. Is there any... Keep pushing buttons to see what happens.
But it always works when we test it. And it never works when we test it.
That's moving, but that one's not.
But that one's very interesting.
So I can go either way. So, according to God's design, the purpose of parenting. Like all good kids, my daughter the other day asked me, she was in the middle of a meltdown, quote-unquote temper tantrum. I don't know if adults you ever have those anymore. The answer is yes, you do. She said, why do I even need you to be my parent? Why are you even my parent? What does that mean? Why did God do that to us? She was speaking on behalf of her siblings. So what is the purpose of parenting? I said, that's a good question. I said, because I do occasionally quote God. I said, honey, I love you, and you're my favorite daughter. I only have one daughter. I say they're my favorite set of twins. The boys, I only have one set of twins. I said, but unfortunately, I also have to be your dad. God calls me to be your dad. So she said, well, I want to talk to God. I said, I do too. So what's the purpose of parenting? And being able to think about the intention and the purpose helps us have clarity of what's our role. Our role helps us understand how do we approach the dilemmas we face. So, pop quiz, what would you say if we were to play Family Feud, put it on the board, it's not on the slides by the way, what would you say the purpose? What are some of the main goals as parents? What is our job?
To raise our kids and get them to heaven.
Yes? How do we do that?
Protect them.
Humanly. That's divinely, absolutely. Humanly we protect them.
Guide. Guide.
Guide them, absolutely. So we have to instruct, we have to teach. Protect them because we care, not because we're trying to control or just be the bully of the house. We love them. We have to model the divine, model agape. Checking off the ones you check, by the way. Okay? Educate and prepare them. This is about stewardship. We really are returning them to obviously their walk with God, but also to the world in which they have to face. So clients, especially teens, love it when I tell them the very first session, my job at the end of the day as a therapist is to help you fire me. Teens love that. They're good. I don't want to be here anyway. So that's my job. As parents, our job is to help our teens fire them. It's okay if it doesn't work either. They're on the slides too. And I kept them pretty light. So to be able to prepare them to deal with, excellent, thank you very much. To deal with the world that's already there for them, but it's about building a sense of resiliency, a sense of preparation, and in a scriptural way, obviously, loving them with grace, which means we're not going to be perfect, but we can continue to grow in a perfected love, and then training them in righteousness. As I mentioned, the temper tantrum brain, if you think of a baby, which I heard one here earlier, their brains, all of our brains grow from the back of our head, back to the front. So the back is the emotional center. When babies come out of the womb, they're usually crying. Okay, we still do that as adults too, but we cry. We don't have words. We then eventually start to have words. Use your words, 2 to 3 year olds. Then we start to be able to rationalize and understand. When I do this, I get this. When I don't do this, I don't get this. Then we start to be able to develop a relational sense of around us. And then when someone's not in the room, I still have an understanding of who they are or what they are in my life. Then I start to be able to develop a larger God sense, and then I can start using, like gear shifting in a car, I can start using gear shifting in order to make good choices. Trained in righteousness. As parents, we're kind of letting them borrow that part of our brain for now. We're hopefully giving them the other parts of their love. They're valuable, they're of God, they're a gift from God, and they're meant to be something that we're stewards of and temporarily responsible for, but only for now. At some point, we have to be responsible to them, but they have to learn to be responsible for themselves. So being able to help them trained in righteousness and help them become their own parents. Is this fair so far? Make sure to begin. This is your 2nd out of 3 outs. If you want to leave, you're welcome to do so. So what is God? How did God design? So that's our old parents, in my opinion. What is God's design for sexuality in marriage? God made us as physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual beings, which includes sexuality. That's not a curse word. That's not a bad thing. Sexuality comes in a variety of forms. So when I say intimacy, which I'll say a lot, intimacy is about an emotional awareness of oneself and a freely giving and receiving to another. There's an emotional intimacy, there's relational, there's about 13 different kinds of intimacy. Intellectual intimacy, experiences together, fun adventures, there's common knowledge, there's variety. So we're meant to freely give, freely receive. We're created to be in relationships of divine communion with God, with others. It's within the sacrament of marriage that the love of this divine is reflected, so the two, which male, female, become one, and that love is meant to be imitated in the relationships we have, which sex is a part of divine, a part of intimacy, but that's for 2 reasons: to procreate, which reflects the life-giving love of the Trinity, and to unify or connect the couple, which reflects the divine communion in the Trinity. So there's a purpose for it. So talk later, when things get distorted or perversed or kind of taken astray, we want to find the understandable part and bring it back to what's the original intent. And then help them deal with the yeah buts. We all have yeah buts living in the back of our brain. Yeah, but why couldn't, or you should, but yeah, but. So we want to understand the barriers of the yeah buts that are keeping us from getting on track or keeping it on the road to what God intended. So we want to keep it very genuine and somewhat simple, but heartfelt, as opposed to perverse, shame, disgusting, feeling like rejection. Whenever sexuality is turned away from what is intended, basically we miss out on the God's purpose. We miss the mark. We miss the aim, which is why, like Jesus with the woman at the well, if you drink of that water, you'll always be thirsty. It's never enough. It's never going to be quench your thirst, but if you drink of what the relationship Christ offers, you'll never be thirsty again. So that hits the mark. From the Catechism of Catholic Faith, 2354, pornography. I'll just read this. You don't have to memorize this unless you already have, which you could come up here and see if this works for you. Pornography consists in removing real or simulated sexual acts. So you're taking it away from what the intimacy of partners is meant to be and using it in order to display it to other people. So you're taking what's meant to be shared privately, secretly, lovingly, and using it for exposure. It offends against chastity because it perverts the conjugal act, the intimate giving of spouses to each other. So it's distorting it. It does grave injury to the dignity of its participants, whether it's the actors, the vendors, the people who consume it, since each one becomes an object of base pleasure and illicit profit for others. So it's being used. It immerses all who are involved in the illusion of a fantasy world. It becomes a grave offense. This is all from the Catechism. Civil authorities should prevent the production and distribution of pornographic material. So that's the Catholic stance. What does it offer? So it offers a facade, false, a fake intimacy, an ideal but empty. It's like empty calories. Do you know that soda actually dehydrates you? It's a liquid, but it dehydrates. If you eat snow or drink, you actually burn more energy and you actually get dehydrated from something that's liquid. So it actually works against you. So it seems like at first, and I'll go into a minute here, the drug component in our brain, that it seems good. What is good must be good, right? But it actually is against. So it's a false or a fake or an empty sense of intimacy. Now, if you ever tried to convince a 2-year-old or a 13-year-old, which they kind of have similar temper tantrum styles, they just have better words, bigger things, and bigger toys to use against you, they're going to swear that you are wrong. I'm sorry, I don't know where you got your parenting PhD, but you are wrong. And they're going to be quote-unquote right according to their brain that tells them this is how they see it. If I put on your glasses, I'd see the world different. So if you put on their glasses, you're going to agree with them. The problem is, as I said to my daughter, God calls me to parent you the way God sees it, not the way I want you to, that you want to see it, or even that I want to see sometimes. God calls me to a different standard. So you're picking a fight with their brain. You're picking a fight with the enemy. You're picking a fight with sort of the battle zone here. It's a false standard. The pornography offers a false standard. I'll explain pornography in a second. I want you to define your own pornography exposure, but it can also be exposure to sexual community. It can be pornography, it can be a false advertisement of what's good or what's attractive or what's important or what's popular. So pornography can be a variety of things, but it provides a false standard of beauty or worth of what's appealing and what's important. For teens, it's a premature type of intimacy. They're not ready. They're not developed. They're not spiritually prepared for that. That's not their preparation at this point. Intellectually, we're not mature, brain-wise isn't fully developed until 23 to 27. It's an unauthorized type of intimacy. It's not our jurisdiction. It's coveting. So it offers something that is a lure, but it's not of substance. So Christopher West simply he puts it as a renunciation of love. You're rejecting what is good. You're rejecting what is of love, or you're feeding into what is not yours. As it seeks to foster precisely those distortions of our sexual desires that we must struggle against in order to discover true love. So it actually offers us the resistance that, yeah, but the why can't I? If we can work past those, we're actually going to start to experience a more divine calling. So it's an invitation and an opportunity, but it comes with a battle. And usually our brains like comfort and convenience and familiarity and simplicity, and they certainly don't like to be told what to do. Do you agree with that? Does it sound familiar to anyone in your house or in this room? Okay. So, for the person who indulges in porn, this is Christopher West, the purpose of sex becomes a satisfaction of the erotic or of the needs, not the communication of life and love. So again, misses the mark. It drives a person to value another person for only what they offer or what they give, rather than who they are, or as Equip says, which reading it from a professional, I've read this before, but super encouraged. 80% of this is about the heart too, which I'll get to. It's about the relationship, discussing from an honest, genuine place. But Equipped would say pornography is more about a thing than a person. Okay? So it becomes more about the thing, and it's not about the person who they are. It gradually cripples a person's ability to love, and there's neurochemical reasons for it. Poisons the brain. It's impossible to love a fantasy, but living in a world of fantasy allows someone to escape from the reality. So it's trying to chase. You ever try to catch smoke? Fog? You ever try to catch smoke? It's there. Can you grab it? That's sort of what it is. We're trying to catch something that it feels real, so therefore it must be, but it's not. So what qualifies? I'm going to ask you, this is one of those awkward therapist pause questions, and you get to think. You'll learn in my sessions if you just look down and don't say anything, I'll keep talking. You're safe. But what qualifies as quote-unquote pornography for you in your life, in your children's lives? Not necessarily saying or accusing anyone of engaging in it, but just in general, what's stuff that qualifies as pornography? How many times have we had to hope our child doesn't ask the question, well, what's that sign on the street say? I don't understand that. What qualifies? Is it images or videos? You mentioned racy articles, posts, feeds online. What qualifies? What kind of elicits some sort of instinct that probably is more of carnal than of divine? Social media accounts? Vanity from I'm looking down, of course, by the way, because that way one feels chosen to say anything. Vanity from popularity or attention. Think of your children, think of your teens. Think of sense of inappropriate stories or humors, texts. Because I can, therefore I will, or I will show it to see what others try to get that response. Is that pornography? Is it group or private chats? So what qualifies as pornography? Have that in mind. Why is that dangerous? Why is that addicting? And towards the end I'll highlight the addiction and what the difference is. But for the most part, everything you're probably thinking about is accessible. Maybe in our mind only. No one will ever know you're thinking about those things. It's accessible in the world around us. It's affordable. And it's usually anonymous. And when anything are those three A's, accessible, affordable, anonymous, they're very potentially dangerous and addictive. Because they are going to the brain's going to latch on. Societally, it's also abundant and it's accepted for the most part. It's incentivized, it's rewarded, you're reinforced. In fact, neurochemically, there's reinforcement all over the place. Dopamine is the reward principle chemical, I like that, I get that, ooh, I like more of that, I want more of that. Serotonin is ooh, that feels good, I like that. Now again, all this is meant to, in a healthy sexuality way, meant to bond, which is oxytocin, meant to bond what you're connected to, which is your spouse. Which is God. It's intentional. So if you ever have a really, I'll do this quickly, a 3-second hug. Do you ever notice at weddings people tend to like tap out after about 3 seconds? Public places, you hug, you tap out. So watch it, you'll see it all the time. Okay? How do you know if someone's done hugging? Someone's going to tap out. What's happening in their brain? They're actually traumatized. There's a fear. There's a, ooh, this was nice. Uh-oh, someone's looking at me. This is weird. Oh, I don't know Uncle Ron too well. Uh-oh. So there's actually an adrenaline going on in that split second. There's actually a fear-based experience. And all of a sudden, all this, what was good, dopamine, serotonin, becomes fear-based, and then I get out of it. If I can hold on just a half second longer, and I can reaffirm some sort of security, this is good, this is pure, this is okay, this isn't good. If I can truly do that, not pretend to do that. If you ever research, go tonight, Google research, our hug is healthy for you. They'll all say yes, as long as it's with a safe person in a safe place. So if we're latching onto something that's purely God designed, it's a beautiful thing. What happens that half second later, it's kind of like as the fever breaks, oh, this is really nice. You get oxytocin, which is bonding chemicals. It's the child-mother bonding. It's after sexuality bonding. It's after a good conversation bonding. It's after hearing scripture bonding. That's that, ooh, I like that. And you want more in a healthy way you latch onto, and you want to bond and connect and create because of it. Does this make sense? But when it gets distorted to pornography, or as long as I get Instagram hits, or as long as I get, all of a sudden that becomes my idol, that becomes my trap, that becomes the carrot dangling in front of me that I keep trying to chase. So our brains are wired that way, and the people that make online stuff, they literally they hire therapists, hire psychiatrists to know what's the most addicting. Candy Crush, Minecraft, all of these video game based and pornographies. It's a marketing tool. Have you ever gone to like a big grocery store? There's 1,500 ketchups. I'm still looking for the blue ketchup bottle as a husband. If I have one thing in my mind, I won't even see all the red ketchup bottles because I'm looking for the blue one. But there are so many specific things that will attract your attention or not. It's all psychological. And it's to tap into your brain. That's what this stuff does. Because it allures to something in your heart, and if your brain can get latched onto it, you're going to want to keep consuming it. So that's why it becomes neurochemically, it excessively heightens pleasure, so it weakens your thinking. Your fire alarm brain is saying, ooh, I want, do I need? Oh, I don't know if it's good enough, or it might be scary, but scary is kind of fun. So it heightens this, and it makes you not think. A lot of times you later, you're like, what are you thinking? Well, I wasn't. Basically drugged, I wasn't thinking. It wasn't rational. It's emotional, it always makes sense, but it was irrational. So it loses decision making, wisdom. It heightens anxiety in the amygdala, which results in curiosity and anxiety and kind of a taboo. Oh, that's interesting. Are you sure I can't touch the food? Did God really say I'd die? That sounds familiar, right? But for boys, that usually turns into more sexual tension or desire to acquire, desire to experience. For girls, it's usually more relational, desire to be noticed, desire to be cared for, to be given attention. So it starts to tap into the heart. When I was reading a very helpful. I'm probably getting too far into the therapy because it's pretty heavy wording, but the way our brain works and how science is finally catching up to scripture. But they'd all talk about it before you make a decision. Your brain taps into your heart for a second to check in internally. Is that the right thing for you? Is that a good thing? So there's a desire of the heart, but it just wraps around our brain. It gets warped by some of these things. There's a cognitive dissonance that happens. That's why all this is addicting, is because if I give attention to it, it gives me pleasure, I must like it. Then it must be good. So I must give it pleasure, give attention to it. And it keeps giving me pleasure, so it must be good. And there's this constant, I'm filling in the gap and justifying, rationalizing. Before I know it, I'm way over here. When in any given bright light, I realize, oh, why would I ever do that? On the surface, it's very ugly. It's not. But there's that cognitive dissonance. Eventually, the brain fatigues. The enjoyment deadens. Therefore, there's a more need for the intensity in order to get that high. And you have to kind of think about, what is that high that's being offered? Is it attention? Is it control? Is it risk-taking? Is it to being able to push the limits to see what happens? Is it how close can I get to the edge without being told too far over? So this fatigues the brain, no longer gets the benefit, so we must up the ante, which is why it starts out as simple, and before you know it, you jump. Or if as a parent you thought things were here, but behind the scenes they were all this stuff, when you finally it gets revealed, you're way over where you thought they ever would have went. So that's why it's important, as we'll talk a lot about in a second here, to create an atmosphere in which we're able to be accessible to each other, we're able to be transparent, we're able to, above all, God and love is stronger than any of this stuff. At the end of the day, that's what matters. So even if you have, I still want you to be open and honest, because it's emotionally and socially reinforcing, it's encouraged, accepted. And then the shame and sin piece, where I'll talk a little more. Secrets, fear, shame usually equates to hiding. I'm not sure if you'll truly love me, so I better not risk saying all this, so I'm just going to keep this to myself. But if anything hidden, usually it grows. Things that are hidden in the dark, things that aren't of light, are usually grown, and they slowly build. Or you silently suffer. I use that phrase a lot when I first meet people in my office. I'll say, it sounds like in many ways you're kind of silently suffering a lot, aren't you? Almost automatically kicks you the burden, there's a heaviness here. So for some, porn becomes a form of entertainment, a reward, an old habit, a coping resource, a solution. I've had people describe it as their best friend, as a blanket, as a kind of like a nursing blanket or a teddy bear, to help them fall asleep. A source of false intimacy, as I mentioned. It becomes an idol. Really, that's put in front of whatever I think is actually going to fulfill me. It's a trap. It's a poison from a brain perspective. And there's all sorts of research that I can, great resources. I was checking those out. They'll point to that. It's a drug, and it can become an addiction. I was going to do a lot of statistics, but not just equipped, which they didn't go too far into it. But if you look at Covenant Eyes, their program, they're promoting, obviously, an accountability filter, which is one of the top ones I'd recommend. I'll give you a resource list. But they have a lot of other resources. This is one specifically written to Catholic parents. But they have a lot of other resources that have they have an entire 82-page updated every year status of statistics that are updated. So, I mean, we could go in there. I'll highlight a few of them, or at least the themes. I've reviewed these every year for 10 years now. It should be no surprise to you that sex is the #1 topic searched on the internet. More than, it used to be a quarter, now it's a third, now it's almost half, more than almost half of all internet searches. Think about that. All internet searches is something to do with sexuality. It used to be 50% of all access on the internet is handheld devices. It's closer to like 85 to 90. Okay, so we can just literally walk in. I mean, walk wherever you want. You have access constantly. Literally, electromagnetic waves are into your leg. They're all there. Unfortunately, the average age of pornography first viewing was 7 to 9 years old. Now it's closer to 6. Moving on 5, 6, 6, 7, moving on 5, 6. Thankfully, most of that's accidental, which is the importance of being proactive and being intentional. I mean, Google search anything without a filter, and you'll see something you didn't intend. Two-thirds or more and more young people are seeing it as acceptable, or at least the norm. Divorce, obviously, internet was a huge factor in 2/3 of the cases. Christian families are more and more seeing it as a problem. Again, I give you all the numbers, but there's a variety of resources. I would say Covenant Eyes is, I forget what they call it exactly, but that is an updated book. You'll see it right on their website. Has all the statistics, very detailed. At a Promise Keepers event, for instance, a Men of Integrity conference, more than half of the men reported visiting a pornography site the week before. These aren't from people who don't care. These aren't from people that don't. So we're not pervasive or impervious to it. And 91% of men raised in a Christian home were exposed to pornography while growing up. So this is from different resource. It's men and it's women. 2/3 men, 1/3 women. That typically is kind of the approach or the statistic, and that's growing from the women's side, just because of it changes more to stories or more relational for women. Again, I ask you to kind of define what you see as pornography. It can be different, but it's definitely within the genders. So what do we do about it? Did I scare you too much, by the way?
No.
Halftime of a little sad now. We'll come back up roller coaster, come up for a little more. Good news. Here's the good news. Now that like Easter Sunday, you can't have an Easter Sunday without Good Friday. So hopefully don't stop on Saturday. Okay, so we have to face the ugly. We have to face the reality of humanity. And the good news is love prevails. Love is stronger than all, even in the ugly. Philippians 4:8, there are things that are noble and true and of excellence. And then there's things that are going to be stronger than this. And I think it starts with, yes, I'll talk to you a little bit about the how-tos, but I want to first paint the picture of heart-tos. So the how-tos, and I'll get to them in a little more detail, but being aware and educated. So that's one of the steps today. Having this parental support within your own family, commitment to each other that this is important. I'll give you a metaphor that kind of helps you, but also commitments, and then parental support from your community. Hey, we want to stand for telling a different story for our kids. We want to have a different household that wasn't exposed to this, or I wasn't able to talk about this. We want to have a different story. So it comes from a support, and there's practical ways to do that. Boundaries and accountability is a part of the how-to. So we need to have boundaries. There's a great book, Cloud and Townsend wrote Boundaries. Boundaries with kids, boundaries with teens. Very, very foundational from a Christian perspective. It's saying yes to the good and no to the bad, and I'll give an example in a second here. But accountability, and again, Covenant Eyes, different things will have lots of. They have a great blog resource. They're not the end-all. You'll see several Catholic resources that I'll highlight, but they have a great blog. They have over thousands of blog articles that are 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, but written from all different perspectives, from priests and pastors, from parents, from but ways of accountability. There's, I think, a how-to. You have to have a continued growth in your own maturing as a parent, as a person. The child-parent relationship, we need to see, as a marriage family therapist, I see relationships as a separate entity. When I meet two people in a room, I literally am looking in between them because I'm seeing what's their God path have to look like to meet there. And as a parent-child, it's the same thing. How do we grow this plant? What kind of soil does it need? What kind of nutrients does it need? Sometimes my daughter needs a little different kind of nutrients, or she's not quite ready to see the sun. She's kind of hissing at it. Versus my boys are needing a lot more slow down the toxicity of their soil. They're always doing this and that. So just recognizing what is our relationship itself needing to grow, and we need to keep being aware of that, and then being equipped in resources. A way to think about this, like guarding a castle, or the book of Nehemiah, rebuilding the city. So rebuilding the city, he starts with the dung gate. Well, first he starts with a recognition of the loss, the brokenness of the city. And then a heart's desire, lament. And then a desire to rebuild it with a vision and a commitment with God. It was 83 days, 87 days to rebuild this thing, which is amazing. But he started with a dung gate. Can you imagine New York City didn't have a sewer system? How quickly it would go septic? Or physically, if you don't learn how to digest, you can't live too long. The oxygen you breathe, if you don't exhale it, it works against you. Okay, so there's a reason why we exhale and exit the things in which are no longer needed, and we need to take a stand. But then he also starts with the bricks one by one, but he gets rid of the stuff going on in the inside. The inside, the people and the critics and the different threats from the inside were more threatening than the things from the outside. So being aware of, as a parent, what kind of castle do we have And how are we guarding it? Are we establishing the walls of what is acceptable and what's not acceptable? Think of a little castle with your flag up there. What does it represent? Hopefully it's the cross first and foremost, but what else do you stand for? Are you establishing the walls? Do you have a plan to respond to any invasions that do happen? It will be brought into your room. Literally, it'll be brought into your house. It already is. The ability and capabilities of it is one click away, and half the time, and I do a whole bunch of other presentations on video games, social media, and kind of all the different things. But there's so many ongoing new apps being developed that it looks like a calculator, and it's actually a link. And you can have the router turned off, and they can link it to something else, and you're never going to stop it. It's how do you respond when you see it. It's what do you stand for in the relationship piece. So being able to respond to the invasions of when they do happen, having reinforcements, being able to know that ultimately God's going to be enough and has already provided for what you need. For no, I'll use scripture a little different, for no temptation you see or you face, others haven't, stand firm, God will come and give you a place to stand underneath and be faithful. For nothing your children try to put you through, nothing that your children are bombarded with, you can't stand firm under with God on a foundation and work it through. Love will be stronger. So being able to trust that reinforcement, but also have a clarity of purpose. And what is your principles? What are you standing for? If you're just a parent for punishment or control, that you'll run out. Eventually they'll be bigger, stronger, faster, smarter than you. They'll have the technology that's going to enable them too. But if it's out of love, if it's out of fairness, if it's out of desire for goodness for them, if you can quote unquote sell them on that, even if they don't like it, but they can start to then experience it, and then they start to want it themselves. That's going to be so much better than what the world's like. But more importantly, inside the castle, what's the culture of your castle? Is there fear? Well, think of the kingdom. Is there fear in that? Is it of dominance, or is it of openness and honesty? Is it honoring and respecting of each other? And that's where we want to get to the heart too. So I think and again, this book does a great job. The four walls, and they talk about different things. But the first is empathy and compassion. Having a heart too of, as parenting, we do love and logic, teaching being sad rather than mad. Try that once. Think of the most frustrating thing your kid just did or said. Or think, I don't think we should believe in this anymore. For a minute or a week or an hour or a week, try just being sad first. Make your, I don't know what leg you guys start walking with. Do you walk with your left leg first or your right leg? I don't know. I don't even know what I like. But I know which one you followed up with. Let's follow up with the other one. Okay. So your initial instinct, try to start with the other one. Hey, why do you do? Wow, man, that would be really sad if you just hit your brother like that, because I think he might actually have to go to the hospital. And there's our deductible, which is probably the most expensive. Now he's sad. But wow, that would be really sad, because what you just told him is you're more interested in winning the game than making sure he's okay. Oof. Hurts. It's so different than what did you just do, which I actually did today because I was shoveling and teaching my daughter how to snowball, which probably is inappropriate. It was pretty cool. She's tall enough so she doesn't get hit when she stops, which is good. I was proud of that. While my other son decided it'd be great to just, he saw this in football, tackle the other guy. The problem is the other guy wasn't looking at all, right? Facing this way, he came this way. So, whoa, of course I was yelling loud because of the snowblower, but I think I was probably just yelling loud, what? No, you can't do that, buddy. As this guy's, hurting. But learning to be sad rather than mad, because when they say, hey, yeah, yep, that web history is right. It's not my friend who came over, or whatever excuses they'll try to give you at first. It's learning how to be sad. So anticipate the first time you're going to want to be mad or shocked or angry, and be sad instead. Having a sense of compassion and sorrow. A sorrowful heart, which is God does too. Connection, not condemnation. So how can we connect to what makes sense? I was trying to think about, and I think that's why I'm able to do therapy for the last 13 years and still be fairly encouraged, well, other than Christianity, Christian therapy, encouraged by humanity, is I've never met someone who doesn't make sense, and I've never met someone who doesn't, at the layers of anger or sadness or fear, at the end of all of this, at the core of all, we all want goodness. There's a desire for goodness. So even when they do something totally inappropriate or completely preposterous of what you would imagine, or so vile and ugly, there's a desire for some sort of goodness. I want to have control of my life. I want to do what I think is best. Sure, but let's guide it back to what God calls us to. So having this heart of not shaming or being ashamed of them, rather a security first. At the end of the day, do they know that you love them no matter what, just as God in Christ, God and soul, the world to give his only Son, and Christ is willing to die for us, for each one of us individually. Period. Do they know that first? Now that they do, let's address this issue. Okay, so that sadness, that heart to first. We do need to clarify and resolve. You're calling them back to love. You're testifying. You're literally doing Christ's job as a parent to them. You're being Christ for them in those moments. You're bringing them back to God's design, not to just conform to the world, helping them drop their nets and be fishers of men. Commitment to the heart, mind, and soul development. As I said earlier, it's about building resilience for the children to build their immunity. Think of your immunity. Ever ask if a 3-year-old getting a vaccine could logically understand what you were doing? You're putting the illness in them. But it's because you trust that their body is designed to learn how to respond and then learn how to be better prepared. Okay? So we're trying to allow some struggle in order to then teach them the love we offer is stronger than that, and we can build off that. But if we try to keep everything so sterile and they never expose anything or never learn how, then they're not going to know how to respond with love. If they're so afraid you're only going to love them if they were perfect, they're never going to tell you where they're not perfect. But if they know you love them anyway, and I do believe you all do, or you won't be here, quite honest, they're going to start to learn to trust that. So what are we up against emotionally? For the person struggling, there's guilt and shame, which I'm going to highlight in a second. There's fear, there's distrust, there's a sense of anger, a denial or delusion of it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal. I can do this and not get away with it. What I just sent doesn't affect me later in life, etc., etc. There's entitlement. There's a delusion of capability, as I said. But usually there's a relief, fear, anger, but also a relief when it's finally discovered. Because there's a, oh, okay. There's a, I don't have to hide anymore. Not too long with teens sometimes, because there's still that need for control. But especially in more of a mature adult base, there's usually a relief. For the supporting family member, when this gets discovered, there's shock and denial. There's usually confusion. Why would you do that? I don't understand. Why would you even need that? So we have to just be aware. These are all natural instincts. There's anger, there's fear. Usually there's our own fear and worry. And then there's an insecurity usually. It stirs up an insecurity, which leads usually to a desperate attempt to control. Or we just want to hide and we want to avoid. So when we face this, we have to be prepared to respond with security. Even though I don't know what you just did or how this is going to affect, even though I lost trust in you now, I know that we're still going to work through this through love. And it's being able to respond in that way. So guilt versus shame, real quick. Guilt is a godly response, or guilt is a natural recognition of what I've done is wrong. I've done something against what was called to be what was healthy. The godly response is acknowledging it, is emotionally feeling empathy and sorrow, sadness for it, confessing it, and then a genuine conviction and repentance to not just pay, restitute, but also to grow. So guilt is actually, all roads lead to the capital in this city, all roads lead back to God. All emotions lead back to God. So if we respond to guilt, yeah, you're right, that was wrong, right? Good news is God loves you too much to let go of you, and so do I. But bad news is that situation, choice you made has a consequence, and we'll take care of it humanly. Relationally, we're still good. Divinely, you're still good. But yep, we do got to deal with that. So guilt. Shame is a fear of who I am is bad. Who I am is not good enough. If you really knew what I did, you wouldn't love me. Remember Adam and Eve when they first found out that what they did was wrong and looked down and they're naked, and God said, who told you you were naked? But first, before that, God said, Adam, where are you? Because they were hiding. Where are you? He calls them back to relationship. So our response to shame is meant to be through Christ, through relationship, through God. We're meant to return to relationship. Because that's actually the same space of fear that we're not loved anymore. So guilt is what I've done. Shame is my fear of who I am. And I want you to envision your child, the person you're thinking of, the situation, maybe yourself as a child or as a teen. Try to hear their heart in this question. If you knew what I was doing or have done. Mom, if they could, I don't know, if you watched Harry Potter's Truth Serum, and I just wish I could give my kids Truth Serum. My twin boys, we have our first twingery. He lost his tooth and it wasn't supposed to come up. And it was in the basement, and I don't know, we've gotten 3 stories, and they're not telling us what the actual truth is, and there's 2 of them, and they're corroborating, and I can't figure it out. So every once in a while, I'm a therapist, so I try to see, like, if there's something, I got them all sitting, hey, do you want to tell me what really happened? No? No. I don't know. All right. But if you knew what I was doing, if you knew what I've done, what would you think? Would you... Either a question they might have, would you, Mom, accept me still? Or a statement they have, I know you would. That can be an affirmation, I know you're still loved, but I'm just still really scared to tell you. Or, I know you would reject me. I've already seen you get angry. Man, I got yelled at for this issue. Could you imagine if I told you this issue? So we have to be aware of what are they saying in their hearts or what question. Our hope for, and I can tell you, is going to a chiropractor, and I've got a few in-laws that are perfect chiropractor, physical therapists, so I know what perfect posture is supposed to be. My wife and I have got a whole portfolio from all the injuries we found, ways to hurt ourselves on. We've got a portfolio of physical therapy. So I know what posture is supposed to be. 9 months and $2,000 in deductible. And, okay? Posture we're supposed to do is even if, to a parent, to a child, even if you've been doing this, this is always going to be true. Hopefully they don't just hear you say it when they're finally found out. They hear you saying that often in their heart. And it's an ever-presence, as God says, I'm always with you. Always with me. And what would you want to fill it in? So even if you've been doing, child, what I want you to know is blank. Now, ideally we don't just do that, as I just said, after we're in a crisis, because we just found out something on the computer. But we have this conversation more regularly. We plant that part deep in their heart. And again, I'll use a little bit from Equipped. Some questions. So what's the how to the heart to? A few questions that are helpful. This is in the 2nd page. Some of these are from Equipped. I added a few others. But creating your castle, creating your house in a way that is this type of culture. Now, I asked my wife, I didn't tell her what I was doing and why, and I asked her her honest opinion, and I think she gave us like a B+, which is cool. Of course, I could tell her all sorts of reasons why we probably are more like a D-, so she just brings up the average, so it helps. She's probably like an A-. I'm on the other side of the bell curve. But is your home a place where your children have a clear sense of what you expect and what God expects? Are you having regular conversations with your children? This is mostly from Equipped, from other resources too, about what virtuous living looks like. Are you painting that picture and helping them genuinely see it? My kids are still thankfully at that innocent age where they genuinely, like church, they genuinely like to go. They're naturally there. They haven't quite gotten to what all the cool stuff the world can still offer them. But I know, like I did on the other side of that, then I got back to I really do like this. This is really fulfilling. This is nurturing. So are we building that conversation? Do you coach them through problems? Do you give them opportunities to struggle and fail and help them know that you're going to walk them through it? I have no horse in the race whether you win or lose. What I'm really after is how you handle this in your heart. What character growth are you? We can train our brain, but what is the growth in your heart? That's what I'm after. Is your home a place where your children feel affirmed, encouraged, loved? Do they listen? Do you listen when they complain or when they concern? That's one where I struggle with because I want to give advice like a good dad and guy does, and as a therapist I have all sorts of social skills advice. And my daughter, she goes, but Dad, my friends don't talk like you do. You're a therapist. I say, you are right. My wife says, I got this one for tonight. So I've got to make sure she knows I'm going to put all my hands behind my back and just hear her heart and not try to fix it for her. Can we do that in I say this in adult work, non-sexual issues, so that way when it becomes sexual issue, it's more heightened and scary and sin-based, that we can still see it through. So we want to practice in these non-scary areas so we can really come through and know we come through. And then do you yourself actively model healthy ways to deal with temptation? Do you show that you look away? Do you show they pay attention to this stuff? Do you show that you filter what you say online? Do you show that? So preventative and proactive. I want to touch just a little bit on proactive, and then on what if we're in the middle of something, or quote unquote in the middle of addiction based. So prevention. Genuine discussion, I think that's a really important piece to have, and that's where I'll have you read through this one, and the next one I'll come back to it at the very end, but there's some discussion. I wanted you to walk away with kind of a cheat sheet of being able to, if you just reflect on these a couple times a week and take 2 bullet points a month or so and just work on those, you change the culture very quick. And I imagine, because you're here, I imagine you're doing a lot of this stuff already. But having discussions with them and really getting to know. Why I like being a therapist is I meet with the kid and the parents, kick the parents out, kids think that's awesome, and then I just say, hey, just tell me what. If mom and dad, they'll never, confidentiality, they'll never know certain things unless you talk about something. They'll never know what we're talking about. So what's the truth on this? What's the truth on that? And they'll just tell me. I wish my kids would do that soon, but they won't, I know. But if being able to have that sense of how relevant is this for you? What's your world look like? My wife's 5 feet tall, so when we go to church or go to a concert, I've learned how to walk into the room like this. People are like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I got to see what my wife sees so I know where a good spot is. And also, I'm like, oh, this is a great spot. They all come from like a German farming family, so I go to their church, and I'm like, this is, oh, I'm tall. But if you can learn how to just come down to your kid's level, you do it when they're little. What does your life look like right now? What's the internet like to you? What's it like going in high school halls? What kind of slang is being said in the locker rooms, etc.? What have you witnessed? Always ask them, what have their friends, what have you witnessed? What have some of your friends have done? What have you heard about? What have heard about a friend of a friend done? And they'll tell you, it's really them, but they'll tell you what they've heard. What are their intentions? At the end of the day, what do you expect out of yourself? 10 years from now, if I don't say a word from now on, what do you expect out of yourself? If I gave you an allowance to rule yourself for a month, what kind of kingdom would we have here? What kind of rules would you put in place? And if it's reasonable and fair, depending on the issue, risk letting that happen for a while. See how they can be a steward of themselves. What are some real world dilemmas you face? So if I don't have access to the internet, all my friends just talk online, and they usually do it at like 10:30 at night. And that's fine, and I know I gotta go to bed, and I'm not supposed to have a phone in my room. But when I come to school, I don't know what they're talking about, and I'm now eating by myself almost all the time because they don't really like me, and those are real world dilemmas. Now, we might not think of it that way, we might say, oh, toughen up, but we have to really meet them where they are. And Jesus did that better than anyone, is meeting them where they are first, and yet still not compromising principle. So we have to meet them where they are. And that gets back to collaborate with them. How can I come alongside you and not just stare down at you? How do I come alongside and make it an us versus it issue? Not a me versus you or my principles, which are really God's, versus you. But how do I make it an us versus it? Because God's going to be with them long after you are. So we might as well join God to help us join them where they are. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Or else we really come at it as an it issue. I can solve a problem in 5 seconds. I'm pretty good at that. But I can miss their heart every time if I do. So I've got to be very conscious of how do I come alongside. Are there opportunities for me to offer wisdom? They'll probably not say yes at first because they don't want your advice. But are there opportunities for me to offer prayer? In what ways can I pray for you? What's the best thing I can do, including I'll say nothing for the next half hour? What can I do for you? As opposed to what do I expect you to do because they say so. So this is that heart to piece. Prepare and preempt them with potential outcomes. Let's just be clear. You could do this if that happened. I always love asking the question. We always have this option. Everything, try it today. You can always make something better. You can always make it worse. Or you could do nothing and leave it to chance. You do the chicken dance if you want. It doesn't do anything. But you always have a choice. Always make it better. Always make it worse. Leave it to chance. Try that once with your kids. Hey, we're eating dinner. What are 3 things we could do to make this dinner better right now? Deeper discussion, reflection of God. What can we do to make it worse? If you're a fun dad, I'm a fun dad, but I also turn into a firm dad. They yell at me for that. But I'm fun dad and firm dad. That's kind of their 2 favorite phrases of mine. But a fun dad would also start making a party and have fun. Firm dad, they had too much fun and then I had to step in. Okay? So we always want to help them do the thinking and try on the options. And they're pretty good at, well, I could do that, that'd be awesome, but yeah, I'd probably get in trouble. Yeah, I don't. They'll start teaching you how you're going to parent them, and they'll already think it through. But if you step in and start telling them what's going to happen, they'll push back, because all you took the microphone from them. All they're going to do is rebel, because that's their only spot. So helping them think things through with you, and then love them enough to hold them accountable. I love you too much. That was my son. That was one of my son's favorite phrases when he was a toddler. He'd go, I love you too much, Dad. oh man, I've done this parenting way too much. Because I said, I love you too much to let you hit your brother, buddy. Yeah, I gave you this awesome crying room. It's called your bedroom. You can cry there as loud as you want until you're done and come on out. But I love you too much to let you think that's acceptable. I love you too much to not have you eat dinner with the family because that's what we do in this house, etc. So I love you too, leading with that. I love you too much to not let you know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. But I love you enough to walk with you through it. I love you enough to struggle and even fail, and I'll still love you. So it's that accountable, it's understandable what they're doing, it's just not acceptable. And here's why, the principles, don't forget the principles. Mark Gregston is a more Reformed church, but he's a great parenting base. He talks about anything that causes a distraction in our life, a disrespect, or a distrust, I need to step in as a parent. So almost, I'll say yes to everything. We have yes days in our family. Kids basically say anything they want. Yes, I say, you pick anything you want, I'll say yes to, so long as it's fair, doesn't cost money, it's safe for everybody and other people around us, etc. But then they get to have a yes day. They get creative ways to think about things. So for the most part, I'm going to say yes to my kids as often as I can about freedom and stewardship and individuality, as long as it doesn't cause distractions in their life, as long as it doesn't cause disrespect to me or to God or others, my wife, and as long as it doesn't cause a distrust issue. For the most part, other than safety, that's pretty close to reasonable. I can give them about 80% of the road, as long as they're mainly keeping it on the road. Do you agree with that? No, try to help them see that you actually mean it and let them test you a little. But try to invite them to that. And then really we're trying to build character. What kind of character are we building? If we can come up with a word or two, when I ask a teen in a session, okay, so you lost your iPad for 3 weeks, you got grounded for 6 weeks, what'd you learn? I don't know, I just get my iPad back and I'm done. What'd you learn? I don't know, mom's I felt it there. Mom's a bully. Okay. What else did you learn? Okay. If we can get the, well, I learned when I'm not respectful, I'm not going to get the things I want. Well, I learned when I don't show proactive in thinking, I'm probably going to regret my decision. If we can get them to sound a couple words or less, sound character-based talking, then we know we're doing our job. And that's what they need to hear from you, not from me. I'm looking at a mirror. Not the 30 sentence lecture. Does this make sense? So, modeling, we have to be accountable for ourselves. This whole session is, we could do a bridge to how do we as parents be accountable, but I also don't want to put anyone on, that's a different kind of group sign up. We could do a bridge to internet accountability in general, social media, parenting with love and logic. I want to give you a little bit of introduction to addiction, just so you have an awareness of where you are on the spectrum. Okay. So, real quick, I'm going to give about 10 or 15 minutes per discussion. If I hear crickets, I can keep going. I'm good at that. Like a walking filibuster. Poor Matt. So, use, abuse, addiction. We use all sorts of things. We use TV for entertainment. We use food for substance and for enjoyment. We can use things. Now, when we talk about sexuality, if it's not our jurisdiction, which 99% of it isn't, we have to be aware that we're already abusing it. We're crossing a boundary. But use and abuse. If I drink 7 sodas, I kind of abuse the calorie intake, and I'm going to have a tummy ache. So I learned to not do that, and I stay in the use section, not the abuse. So use and abuse. Abuse is about boundaries. In general, we can struggle with any area of our life, but abusing sexuality is already a boundary cross for the most part, especially internally. But it becomes an addiction. Anything can become an addiction as well. It becomes an addiction when it follows a repetitive pattern. You keep returning to it. When it's self-medicative, I'm going there for a reason. I'm using it as a band-aid or as a substitute for something. It's my source of identity or importance, or it's my source of entertainment, or I'm using it in self-medicating. I'm dealing with other stuff that I should be dealing with in a healthy way. I'm dealing with this to cope or to numb or to avoid. When it becomes degenerative, that's the tolerance effect. The more and more I need something, the more I go to it, but it offers me less and less enjoyment, so I need to up it and up it and up it, or get more, or I just get less and less pleasure from it, and I become depressed because of it. I think it was Oprah or Mark Povich, one of those mid-90s, that they had sexual addiction-based people, and they were interviewing, and they said, I don't even enjoy sex. And people are uproar because they don't understand, like, what do you mean? You're saying now you're the victim, you're saying you don't enjoy it, but what they're talking about is there's no pleasure in it. Because it stripped all that brain pleasure piece, all those chemicals before. So it's degenerative, it becomes unmanageable, that it gets bigger than it was meant to be, and it becomes more and more pervasive in their life. It becomes a sense of orientation, I'm orienting my life around it, and it's becoming my identity. So it becomes bigger than it was meant to be, and it becomes destructive. So anything can do those, and when they become those things, that's what we consider as experts as an addiction. Types of acting out can vary, but each have roots to usually what's on the story of their heart, or what's the God space or the hole that's missing. Biologically, medical factors like impulsivity and anxiety and depression can play, but most addictions can be addressed in an emotional, relational, and spiritual work. Most of it is a searching, a never-ending searching for something that's not going to be filled that way. You can't get there from here. Think of that for a second. You can't get there from here. We're kind of trying to go this way when we really need to go inward, upward, and then to healthy ways outward. So like an iceberg, 10% of an iceberg is above water, 90% of it's below water. So who we are as humans, we kind of see our hair colors and where we live and all these things, but a majority of our life is underneath. And same thing with addictions. The behaviors are what the addictions turn into. So whatever your flavor of choice, whatever gambling or different things, that's the behavior, that's the addiction, but it's the underlying thoughts and attitudes and beliefs about oneself, about God, or about sexuality, or it's the relationships people hold, it's the intimacy in their heart, or the distorted intimacy that they have. That's usually what creates the addiction. So it's a deeper rooted. So we want to be able to identify, and there's a resource here that'll help you with this, but what are the triggers, what are the different ways in which they're letting that thought kind of ruminate in their mind and they're obsessing about it. They can't wait to play that video game, or, oh, I saw that on TV. I wonder if I could click on this article. I bet I'm going to research this celebrity. And they do that 10 hours later, but it got planted earlier, and they were dwelling on it for the last 10 hours. You'll never know that, but their actions say that. So it shows up on actions, but it's what's going on behind the scenes. It creates an internal response and then an outward response, like as well as hiding, lying, or hopefully eventually confessing. So there's kind of this style. All acting out is understandable within the context of their storyline, but it's either unaware emotions or unmet needs. At the end of the day, it's not integrated into true relationship. It's not brought into the streamline of what God intended. I do a lot of men's adult-based work. When someone acts out, they're essentially, one, they're sinning. They're being selfish. They're saying, what I think I need is more important than what God offers me. What I think I need is more important than what God has already